I think one of the interesting things that's been coming up a lot in some of the conversations that we've been having with people is really around the importance of the way in which we use language to get outcomes from people. And as part of this particular topic, I think that the power of language in leadership and sales is something that we need to discuss. And I don't know about you guys, but it's certainly something that I think is really relevant in the context of, corporations and businesses that we work with, especially with the focus on diversity and inclusion and, being able to bring people into conversations and as well as, producing outcomes, because ultimately in business, it is about being able to get an outcome, but we're dealing with humans in the process. What do you think, Brad?
Yeah, I think one thing we look at in leadership is being able to manage time and effectiveness of time. And if your communication is not on point, then you're going to blow out a lot of time in backwards and forwards communication, not getting the response that you want. So I think that if you can become albeit consciously aware of your communication, how you can do that, you can sort of really focus on getting some clear outcomes in your communication when it comes to leadership and sales. Because at the end of the day, you have the same amount of time to get the words out. How do you get that out in the effective amount of time to get your message across?
Yeah, and I think that is a really important point that you made around consciousness in communication, because often what we're seeing as being a really big thing in this day and age is the importance of recognizing bias that we have. And as we know, we do a lot of work in dealing with both conscious and unconscious mind. And so I think the importance of bringing to the forefront how the unconscious mind plays a role in our communication is really important. What do you think, Alex?
Well, a lot of language that we use is quite unconscious to us, and we know that. So a lot of the times the way that we actually communicate and project ourselves to others quite often is unconscious. So even though you consciously feel that you're aware, a lot of the information and a lot of relevance to what it is that you're discussing is unconscious. So,
and I think a lot of people don't recognize that we actually have an overall 93% of our communication is actually nonverbal. So there's 7% in the words that we're utilizing, which actually help us to articulate what it is that we want to get. And so much of the time, we find that the nonverbal communication that is largely unconscious to us is perhaps communicating something totally different from what we would like to get across. And that brings me to, the importance of language and how we're utilizing our words in order to paint the picture around what's going on in our mind, but also how do we get an outcome from someone around us, and how does the quality of the words that we use actually matter? Brad, I think about the importance of the conversation with some of those leaders we're working with.
Yeah. And before we go there, I just wanted to say one thing. As we talk about, and I've seen you do this a few times, Shondell, so when you're pointing at someone and going, what are they doing? How the hell did they do that? You've got to realize that when you're pointing to someone, there's three fingers pointing back at you as far as how did I articulate and how did I communicate to get that message across? And that's that perception that often that Alex was talking about. How is our internal filters putting information out that we're perceiving poor communication? And this comes back down to one of the early things we do in our coaching program and leadership is, again, becoming consciously aware of their communication. But one of the things that's really interesting is that you get these people who are spending, a lot of time trying to solve problems. And one of the clear words that they use, which doesn't really give them any solutions in the context of solving problems, is the word why. And a lot of times leaders would be saying, I don't understand why they're doing it. I ask them what they're doing. And again, the use of why in the context of eliciting or trying to solve a problem or look at a behavior doesn't give you information that's useful. It gives you a lot of reasons, justification, and doesn't actually give you any content that allows you to leverage to finding out what is a deep problem. So one of the things that we do in the context of leadership is to have people remove the word why from their vocabulary. In fact, we even sometimes set up the why jar. Every time they say the word why, they can put $1 in there to count of it. Now, what this does, it becomes consciously aware of when they're using the word why. So what do you do instead? You can't say nothing. So the question is, you replace the word why with what or how. All right. So why are you doing that? It will give you the response of justification and reasons, as opposed to how did you decide to do that? Or what were you thinking that led to that insert behavior here? And it gives you a great level of depth of content and understanding what is the intention behind that behavior. What was the communication that broke down that you were giving? And we've seen this happen in an environment of a sales team and a sales leader. And it revolutionized the entire business because this person was constantly dealing with putting out fires because they're dealing with all the reasons, all the why, as opposed to how and what. And it sped up the ability to have effective meetings. It sped up the ability to be able to find where are the problems that are really taking place as opposed to the reasons and justification. And as a result of that, that person said to me at the end of their program that little bit of information, removing the word why, had the greatest shift in their ability to get the results out of their team. So it was pretty amazing stuff.
Yeah, that reminds me of when I was teaching an NLP practitioner training, and we actually use a lot of NLP and linguistic concepts in the trainings that we offer because it's such an important part of how people choose their behaviors, how they put their behaviors in place. And it was so interesting. I was dealing with a gentleman who's quite a senior person in the real estate industry, and we're teaching a particular part of neuro-linguistic programming, which is around the meta model. And that's really about replacing why with understanding what's the root cause of where people are coming from when they're communicating, and really being able to get to what's not being said through the language or the words that are being used. And we just had this one segment where we actually changed up and said, instead of asking why as part of the way in which we use language, because you get a lot of reasons, you get a lot of justifications, you get all those distinctions that perhaps may not be helpful in helping you to understand what's the real barrier from the prospect or from the client or the person you're communicating with. And we wanted to replace what led you to that decision or what's important to you about that, rather than why is that important to you, rather than the distinctions that we're missing from part of that. And it was so funny. He turned around and he said to me, I've got 7 days here. This is day 1 where we're learning some of this context of language and how important it is in getting different responses. And he said, in terms of the investment that I've made, for me, everything I needed, and I'm sure there's more to come, was just in that one piece of removing why from my vocabulary and asking questions that actually gets information that I was unable to attain before. And so that was super valuable to him.
Good. I think this maps across into other areas of your life, whether or not you are a parent, being able to have conversations with school teachers, whether or not you're in being able to have conversations with your partner, understanding what is it that the language that you're using and what's your perception and what are you projecting out there with that communication will lead to a great awareness. Now, you can't just go into work and all of a sudden turn on your language and make it work. So the more context that you can apply and use this in relationships, talking to your children, and being aware of the conscious use of language is a big thing. And I know, Alex, you've had a couple of examples where you have your sons have gone, stop NLPing me in the language there. Give us a couple of examples where you've been able to brought conscious awareness of their communication as a parent and being able to be and leading other teachers to being aware of that in that context.
Well, I guess, Fred, there's a couple of ways of looking at this, and I'm probably backtracking a little bit, but it's not only how you're communicating, but of course it's how the person that you're communicating with, their communication skill set and how they communicate with you. So what are the predicates that they're using? What are their preferences? Are they a visual? Are they auditory? So it's making sure that you're key in tapping into the person that you're communicating with and that you understand that your communication is being received effectively. So that's foremost the most important thing there. With my boys, it's been really, really interesting. So I didn't realize how differently I'd raise my children, being an NLP practitioner and trainer. And I guess that's the thing that's been really helpful for me within my home is using positive and language that's reinforcing. And it's been, speaking with the boys, it's been focused on the outcome. It's utilizing their language, and it's making sure that I'm able to communicate with them effectively.
Good.
What's been some of the impacts of that? What have you seen changes?
Well, I guess, one of the biggest changes and the most impact I've seen is on my older boy, Jack. And, he's actually now trained in NLP himself. And what that's actually done for him is enabled him to be able to, A, communicate effectively with other people, be a little more aware about other people's communication style. And of course, it's allowed him the skill set of being able to maintain and manage and review his own communication.
So, Alex, just for the recording, can you tell us a little bit about what a predicate is?
So a predicate is, it's somebody's preferred representational system. So it's a preferred representational system. People are very, very different. The way we communicate, the way we process information, we process it through our 5 senses, of course, which is, your visual, auditory, kinesthetic, gustatory, olfactory, and of course we sum that representation of that communication up using self-talk, which is AD. And people, quite often have preferred, a preferred system that they actually refer to. And so for some people, it could be visual. So they talk a lot about how things look. And, you could be speaking with somebody that is more auditory. So it's how something sounds. And of course, if somebody's very kinesthetic, whether it be tactile or, external or internal, of course, for some people, they're feelers. So communicating with them in regards to feelings and understanding that when you're having that conversation with them, the language that you choose is more aligned with how it is that they're actually effectively communicating with you. So therefore, you're not communicating from your own representational system, you're understanding how they communicate. And so you understand that your communication becomes effective.
And I think that's so key, because we talk about being aware of your communication, and you may be of a particular predicate, being visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, and how you communicate, and you get a really good engagement and you get great communication with people who communicate like you. However, there is a percentage of people you're going to miss. So being a leader and understanding how you communicate and how you turn up, as far as how the predicates you're using, visual, auditory, or kinesthetic, how to be then understanding, being consciously aware of it, how you need to and when you can change that at will. And it reminds me of a particular leader we're working with who was very monotone with his tone, very matter of fact, very even keeled with his no sort of pitch or tone. A little bit, some feedback might have been he had given that he's a bit robotic in that way. So his awareness, and for him then to be able to go there and actually listening to what people are saying and creating a bit of a bingo card, so to speak, of language, started bringing his awareness in what he was doing and how other people communicated. So therefore he started being aware of it when he was very monotone and and again, the feedback was very robotic. He was able to sort of start changing and be a little bit more approachable, a bit more personal. And of course, with that, then comes all the other emotions that in communication that comes across there as building rapport.
Like in terms of our leaders and people who are operating, whether they're managing teams of people or they're pacing and leading clients, what do you think that you've seen has been the massive impact of people getting conscious awareness around their preferences, but also being mindful around other people's preferences? What do you think the use is of predicates?
Well, I think, first and foremost, it's bringing into their awareness. So it's them understanding the communication model, which is something that, as you know, we go through with people in leadership, and it's them understanding how it all works. And I guess that's the thing, is when they are communicating with other people, once it's brought into their awareness, then they're able to utilize the skill set. So something that hasn't been aware for them before, they're now, wide awake, and they're able to effectively sum up and analyze the way that they're actually being received. And, being able to communicate with their staff members, it makes it's a huge shift and a huge change, because all of a sudden when they're working with other people, or they've got people underneath them that are coming to see them, or, people that they're working with come to see them, they're communicating on a personal level with that person. So that person feels heard, they feel understood, because, they're tapping into their representational system. It's also fantastic as a leader to be able to get that type of feedback. And that feedback is instant. It's an instant feedback response. So if you're communicating with somebody and you're not getting what it is that you think that you're effectively communicating, you get to look at the person that you're actually communicating with and understand their model of the world and where they're coming from, and you're able to reframe the way that you're communicating with them for a beneficial outcome all around.
Yeah, I love that. And I think one of the things that's coming to mind for me is one of the rules or assumptions in neurolinguistic programming, which is the meaning of the communication is the response you get. And I think that because we've got so many of our behaviors that run at a biased level, so we have unconscious communication, and sometimes we don't actually mean we mean something different from our intent. So from the behavior we exhibit to the intent that we had originally, it's not always visible for the people that are receiving our communication. And, one of the things that we talk about in NLP is obviously predicates, which is our preferred representational system, whether that be visual or auditory or kinesthetic. But what a lot of people don't recognize in terms of the utilization of this information is the fact that we are often having our behaviors affected by those preferences. So in our studies and the way that we teach, we have a little assessment that people can do so that they can find out what's their preferred representational system. Are they visual? Are they auditory? Are they kinesthetic as a lead? Are they auditory digital as a preference? But one of the interesting things is that we can often see it in people's behaviors, and we can hear it in the words that they choose. And, you might recognize that there's a little plaque in the back there that actually says breathe. And so that was a gift from one of my clients who, when they learned about some of the behaviors that people do based on their preferences, he was very clever and recognized that my lead preference is actually visual. And so sometimes one of the characteristics of visual preferred language is that you can actually speak very, very, very quickly in terms of the timing of pace. And it was early in my career, and this particular client was attending a seminar where I was getting really excited. And because I'm a visual lead, when I got really excited, I started talking at 1,000,000 miles an hour, hardly took a breath. And so he thought it was very funny to buy me a plaque to remember to breathe. And so it is something that I have learnt to do, which is to adapt my communication, because it was fine to be able to be having a conversation at a fast pace when I was speaking with another visually preferred person. However, when I was speaking with somebody who perhaps might have had a kinesthetic preference, it was often overwhelming for them to listen to the pace at which I was speaking. So I think this is really about understanding adaptability and remembering that the meaning of the communication is the response we get. And if we're not paying attention to how our behaviors are being received, as well as our intention in delivering them, then we might be actually creating miscommunication in a place where we wanted to create alignment and win-win scenarios.
So I think at the end of the day, if you're looking at how you communicate and you become consciously aware of it, this is a great way for you to be empowered and your communication, getting a message across. It's a great way for you to be able to empower others by being able to get clear and concise by communicating in the way that they communicate to get the message across. And then with that, being aware of how you can change the words and the language that you use, the difference that the language can make can then get those different results. Again, communication response you get. And one of the things we look at, again, like removing the word why, there are other words that we like to remove from the vocabulary in certain contexts, all right? Like I said, removing the word why in the context of problem solving. There are other times when you want to ask the person the why, what's your why? And of course, there's a particular person who has done a whole bunch of branding based on what's your why. You probably know what I'm talking about. So that's is a good example. So looking at what we do as far as being in power with our communication is understanding how we can change language that gets that result. So one of the things we have into the language pattern that we use that leads to empowerment is the agreement frame. Often when you're in a conversation with someone and someone says something you disagree with, you might say a comment like, I understand what you're saying, but, all right? And when you say, I understand what you're saying, and then but, these are two words that don't go well when it comes to empowering conversations. And the reason being is it's very difficult for anybody to really understand 100% what's going on in your mind. Very, very difficult. And when we use the word but, it negates what we just said. So instead of using the words understand and but in the context of listening to objections, or people presenting to us reasons why they can't do something. It could be some scenario where someone's being constantly late. We say, we understand you've got a family, but you need to be here on time. It doesn't sort of go down as well as what it could be. So what we like to do is become aware of how we can use language, which is empowering, in order for us to be able to go through and not necessarily have a jarring conversation with someone. So that instead of saying I understand, we like to use the word I appreciate, followed by and, going through that process. So Shondell, you've got some great doozies with this over the period of time where you've gone through. Can you give us a couple of examples of where you've used the appreciate and in the context?
Yeah, I think when we talk about context of language, when we talk about how our words can affect the listener's experience and what that does for creating better rapport, creating better outcomes, I think it's really funny when we start talking about eliminating the word but from the vocabulary. A lot of people go, but why? Which, if we think about but and why, which is two of the words that we recommend that people don't use when they're wanting to create great outcomes and to get understanding. Of course, there are some contexts where they are appropriate. In the context of handling objections, in the context of creating agreement, I think the agreement frame is really useful. And this is a very useful tool that we have in NLP, where we actually look at eliminating the word but and however, because however is simply just a fancy but. It has the same effect as when you talk to people about the word but. So, for example, if I said, I absolutely love your haircut, but I'm not sure about the color. Initially, what happens to the listener is they go, oh my God, what's wrong with the color? They completely negate and basically don't even hear the compliment about the hair. They're just worrying about what's the problem with my hair color. And often when we get objections from people, they might say, look, I really love your proposal, but, right? So you're not actually hearing the acknowledgement of whatever it might be. So I think that when it comes to the listening experience, especially in the context of sales and leadership, because remember, when we're dealing with leading others, we are also selling. We're just not selling a product or service. We're selling our ideas and our concepts. So whenever you meet with resistance in a conversation, what you really want to do is you actually want to acknowledge what the person has just said. You want to be saying, I appreciate where you're coming from. And then I'd like to actually address or ask this question. So rather than actually putting a great big full stop in the sentence, what we're doing is we're actually joining and creating a simple conjunction between the acknowledgement of the objection or the acknowledgement of the compliment or whatever the first part of that agreement frame was. And then we link it to the next part or the point that we would like to discuss or the areas that we would like to address. So I think it's really important that, and I see this happen in leadership all the time, where someone will want to actually acknowledge something that someone's done well, but they want to give some feedback. And so they negate the acknowledgement of giving really great feedback by using the word but or using the word however. The listener's experience focuses only on the negative part, which is not super empowering, and it really doesn't elevate the listener in terms of what was done well or what is looking good and then looking for areas for improvement. What it does is it focuses on perhaps what might be negative.
All right. So in communication and looking from communicating and having empowering conversations, we talked about being able to remove certain words. There's also the way that we use our tone. As we alluded, only 7% of communication is words. So what's the rest of it? Well, a large percentage of it is tone, and the rest of it is tone and physiology and how we use that. And what we know is there's 3 types of intonation within our language that we use that can really change the perception of what's being said and how it's landed. And the first one is question tone, where tonality goes up at the end of the sentence. Now, I'm going to use the word 3 different ways. So there's no content here. It's just the tone. And I want you to notice a difference when I do it. So first I want to do question tone. Tonality goes up at the end of the sentence. And Australians are pretty well known for using this at the end of every sentence. They lose a lot of credibility, don't they? All right. So the concept here is word. So word, where the tonality goes up. So word, it's going up. So it's a question tone. All right. So when we're using that, effectively, we're creating a question on what we're saying. So if we're giving a fact and we're going word, 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 we're giving a fact with a, do you really think it's a good idea to do that today? All right, we're creating that question. All right, then there's a statement tone where the tone stays the same, where it's word, word, word. And again, this is very good. We want to be able to get a point across and be very clear and concise. Okay. And then there's the command tone where the tone goes down the end, word, word, word. All right. To be able to get that point across. All right. So question going up, statement staying the same, and tonality, tone going down for command tone. All right. And these, being aware of how you use this, can make all the difference of how you land that incredible piece of words with the right tone, and the physiology can make all the difference to what's going on in their head that creates that picture in their head, and therefore ends up being the behavior they do as a result of the communication you give them. So become aware of when you're using tonality and see if you can start using it with a bit more intention and making sure you get your message across. Shondell, do you want to give me a couple of other examples of where you might see this being used?
Yeah, I think that a lot of things that people are concerned about in today's society, particularly in leadership, it might even be in family circumstances, or it could be, in the context of client relationships, is that generally people are concerned with a couple of key things. One, will they get their message get across clearly with authority and the leadership and the influence that they would like to have? Two, will people like them, and will they relate to them as an individual, because a lot of the time people take things personally. And then the other thing that people are concerned about is making sure that those two boxes are ticked and that they actually get a result. And so when we talk about our delivery of our communication, so we're using words, we're using our physiology, because there's a lot of communication that's nonverbal, and we're also using our tonality. And in that tonality and that pacing, we have a perception that's being created by the way in which we're communicating our words. And one example that I have that's with relating to one of the intonation patterns, which we call the questioning intonation pattern, where a person will deliver a piece of information, go word, word, word. So their tonality goes up at the end of the statement or the end, and it leaves a questioning tonality in the mind of the listener. And so I was doing a leadership program, and I had a very amazing, influential female leader who was, really concerned about building the buy-in that she had from her listeners. So it wasn't so much about creating authority for the sake of, I'm the boss and I want you to listen to me. We were talking about building authority with integrity, being able to create a message that people wanted to follow because it made sense to do so, and that they saw her as somebody that they could rally behind, the ideas that she was sharing, etc. And one of the biggest challenges was not so much that she didn't have great ideas or that people didn't like what she was saying. There was a je ne sais quoi that was coming. I'm not sure what it is that was coming across. And so I offered to go and listen to a couple of her presentations with her team and with some of the stakeholders. And what I noticed was that in her presentation, for every statement she was making, instead of making it with a tone of certainty, which would be either a statement tonality, which keeps the intonation quite the same level across the board, or doing it with a command tonality, which actually has the tone go down at the end of the statement. What she was doing was applying questioning tonality, and so it would be like, "This is what we're doing for this quarter, right? This is what I need you all to do." And so it gave this perception that she wasn't sure about what she was asking people to do, because she was delivering it like she was asking a question. So when it comes to having integrity and also being able to communicate with a sense of influence and authority to get people to really believe in the message that you're sharing, which is one of the key concerns that people have when they're wanting to deliver in leadership, is to make sure that you are making sure that the right tonality is applied for what you're attempting to talk about, and that you utilize your tonality in such a way that people can feel a sense of confidence in your messaging when you're delivering the messaging to them. And so the outcome of that, just to be clear, the outcome of changing the delivery of the tonality to actually add a little bit more what we would call a command tonality or a statement tonality, was that suddenly people started to have more confidence in her messaging. They weren't questioning whether she was sure about the plans that she was rolling out. And so without changing anything about her personality or her character, simply by just changing the delivery of the tonality when she was addressing her stakeholders, her team members, she actually was suddenly perceived as being a more confident and a more thorough leader, simply just by changing the delivery of the tonality of her words.
One of the interesting things that language that people use and how it changes the perception is really interesting. And one of the things I've been saying to groups of people and to individuals and leaders is understanding what is the language you use and what's the response you get with particular sayings that we have. Now, you may have heard the term fake it till you make it. All right. You may have used it. And again, it seems like a good piece of advice for someone who's lacking confidence, a good piece of advice, it seems, to someone who, can probably got the skills to be able to do it, but don't believe they can do it. So they're lacking the belief in themselves. So fake it till you make it doesn't sound like an overly bad thing. And again, it's always used with the right intention there. But the purpose of the actual language behind it is faking it till you make it. The fake it is the perception that you can't actually do it. All right. And fake it till you make it is, again, if you can't do something, how are you going to get there? So this is the underlining message that's been sent to the person when you say, oh, look, you'll be fine. Just fake it till you make it. What I much prefer, and which is almost exactly the same language pattern that creates a different outcome as far as the picture in your head as what that communication means, is act as if. All right. So the act as if is acting as if you can do it. So the presupposition, in other words, the assumption of the language is that you can do it. All right. Where the fake it is the presupposition or the assumption, the language that you can't do it. So therefore you have to fake it. So changing that to act as if, like, I can do this, I can act as if I can do it, is a lot more empowering, as opposed to telling yourself that you can't do it and you have to fake it because you can't do it, therefore you'll never be able to do it, as opposed to acting as if you can do it and then seeing the results you get. So this is a classic example where wordage, language is used and sayings are used that are then repeated without actually the conscious awareness of it. And again, how disempowering it can be, giving someone some great advice to fake it till you make it and not realizing what you're actually telling them out of their awareness, out of your awareness, as opposed to act as if. And I've mentioned that a number of times to people, and it's been quite an eye-opener. So I hope it's opened up your eyes and your ears into how you can shift and change sayings that you may say on a daily basis, or hear from your leaders or your supervisors, that you, when you think about it, what is the message behind that? What's the assumption in the language they're making that would be misinterpreted or misheard or misread or taken on board in a different sort of meaning? And again, it's hard work becoming conscious of your language, because we only have been started becoming conscious of our language when we're sort of 7 or 8, and we've been practicing being unconscious ever since.
You know what that reminds me of? Certainly the impact of language in terms of how we focus our intention is a really big conversation, especially around communication bias. And, we've heard the comments, fake it till you make it, or, one of the things that I remember having conversations with our co-founder, Teresa, my dear mum, was the importance of being able to have goals and targets and things that you weren't second guessing yourself about. Like, we often talk about the itty bitty shitty committee. They're the group of people that sit on your shoulder and tell you why you can't have what you want, why it's never going to work out. No matter what you do, it just won't be any different. And so when we set goals and targets where we've got language that's incongruent or that doesn't marry up with what we think is possible, not only have we got the BS meter from everyone else, we've also got the BS meter for ourselves in terms of taking that. And so Teresa and I were having a conversation about that. And she used to tell her clients that rather than fake it till you make it, she preferred to say, I'm in the process of becoming. Because when she would say, I'm in the process of becoming whatever the goal is, what that would allow her to do is to actually know that she wasn't there yet, but she also needed to keep the foot on the accelerator and had a very clear picture of where she was becoming to, or where she was in the process of arriving at. And so Teresa used to do a lot of hypnosis in the areas of, health development, and usually goals that would take someone a little bit of time to ascertain, whether it be weight loss or whether it be the rebuilding of health. And as you know, if you're doing affirmations and you're standing in front of a mirror and you're telling yourself that you're slim and healthy and fit, but you're carrying an extra however many kilos more than you want to be, then your unconscious mind might actually call BS on the fact that, you don't have that as yet. And so this is one of the fundamental challenges with saying things that you don't feel congruent about, and the impact that it can have on the action. Because if you don't have the support of your subconscious mind connected to the language that you're using, if you're saying fake it till you make it, or if you're saying, I am a certain weight or a certain health, or it might even be to do with wealth or acquisition of something that takes a long time to acquire. If you're saying as if you have those things right now, then it can sometimes create a problem in the way in which you create the milestones toward that. So when we're writing goals, we love the idea of saying it the way you want it, because that obviously gives the unconscious mind something to focus on in terms of an outcome. But when you're in the process of becoming, or when you're in the process of moving towards that and passing through the milestones, it can actually be detrimental to pretend that you have something, because it changes the way in which you behave.
I love that. And I think that's a great way of being able to avoid those obstacles that come up that aren't our friends. When we're going through and we put those goals out there and we plan on achieving something, and we use the SMART goal process, whether or not you believe in SMART goal process or not, it's a bit of a few people have got a bit of a take on it. And I think that overall, if you're saying things the way you want it and you're not capping it at a particular limit, then it certainly is a SMART goal. And then when you hit that SMART goal, when you set that SMART goal, you're using language, saying it the way you want it. It is now date, time, and year in the future, and I have state your outcome here. You're saying it that way, then we are sending a message to your unconscious mind, this is what we're going to be achieving. And then once we set that goal, we then come across those obstacles. And often those obstacles are our own obstacles within ourselves, as far as our beliefs of what we can be doing. And then how we support those beliefs by the language saying, yeah, well, I don't have the confidence, so I can't do that. Or I can't learn this, therefore I can't do that. Therefore, all of a sudden what happens, we start creating these obstacles in our language, and that's very disempowering. So I think that one of the sayings I say is, when you set a goal, beware of the obstacles, and obstacles are our friends, because they're giving us feedback that we're going on a direction. Okay, whether or not that obstacle be something we created ourselves or something that's come to us, if we look at it as an obstacle, as feedback for us to show that we're on a path and get to where we want to go, we can start thinking about the language we use around that. And I love that concept of I'm in the process of having, or in the process of being. I think it's a great example where using language to change the picture in your head to be more empowering.
Yeah, I think the pictures that we make in our mind, a lot of people don't realize that second to second to second, you have these pictures in your mind which actually influence how you feel about things, and also your physiological response to them. And those three things together actually produce the behaviors that we respond with. And believe it or not, one of the ways in which we can change the pictures in our mind second to second is actually by changing our language and our linguistics. And so when you say things the way that you want it, you actually put in place much more of a focus of the picture that you want to create. And so there were some great studies done in the 70s around when occupational health and safety came in, and there was all these warning posters around people being careful. And so what they found was that the focus on all the things that could go wrong as part of those posters actually increased the incidence of workplace accidents, because we were putting in the forefront what people needed to be wary of, using negations which are not processed by our mind. So as part of business application, I think language can be really powerful, because remember, our communication to others will have the capability to influence what kind of pictures they make in their minds too. And it's really interesting because in some of our sales and leadership programs, we will often talk about how we use language in our text messages or in our emails or in our proposals or documents that we're sending to stakeholders or team members. And one of my favorites, which often makes people gasp or go, oh my God, I never thought about it like that, was when I talk about a very common sign-off phrase in emails. And so you've probably done it. I know I certainly did before I learnt about the importance of language. And you'll see that it's a very common way to sign off emails where people say, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Now, one of the things that's really important about this statement is that it puts a focus on what you would like the person to do. But when you use the word don't, your unconscious mind doesn't process it. So when we don't is an example of a negation. And so when we use the word don't, our unconscious mind doesn't hear it. So what we simply hear is, please hesitate to contact me. And so when we talk about say it the way you want it, have a think and get conscious about what you're really saying when you're utilizing words like don't, can't, anything that looks like a negation, not. You might be sending the wrong signal to that person's mind in terms of what you'd actually like them to do. And so one of the things that I recommend is think about your intention. When you sign off an email and you write, please don't hesitate to contact me. I don't know, maybe you don't want people to contact you back and you think you're doing the right thing, but odds are it probably wasn't conscious to you. So what you probably want is that if that person has some questions, that you want them to reach out to you. And so when I sign off my emails, and if you've ever received an email from me, you've probably seen that I say, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. So what I'm doing is I'm actually placing my intention on what I want people to hear. So if I would like them to reach out to me and to feel comfortable to do so, if they have questions, then that's what I'm going to say. I'm going to say it the way that I want it. And I see that this happens where we don't have any conscious awareness around language so often, particularly in our conversations, our verbal dialogues. I've seen many leaders who are concerned about the fact that they don't want people in their team to judge them harshly, or they don't want someone to think something bad about them because they're giving the feedback. And so when I say, look, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, what I'm really instructing is their unconscious mind to take it the wrong way. I hope you take this the wrong way. So we want to bring some conscious awareness around the language that we're utilizing and ask yourself the question, am I communicating effectively for what I want my listener to hear? And if not, then it's not your listener that needs to change their behavior. It is, in fact, you. And so one of the things that you'll hear me say sometimes is that when we point the finger outside and we make a judgment, there are three fingers pointing right back at us. So if you're not getting the outcome that you want from your communication, then the thing that might need to happen is to actually ask, well, what communication am I utilizing? And is there a different way that I could communicate that would get me a different outcome?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about establishing, an outcome first and foremost. So it's when communicating with somebody, it's pre-framing and formatting for an outcome. And then you're laying into that what your expectation is going to be of that meeting. So that when we get started, whether it be, and this is the wonderful thing about the format system, once you've utilized the format system in terms of being able to communicate effectively with people, you can utilize that in any circumstance. So that's one of the things I mapped across. And anytime I go in for a school interview, that's the first thing I do with one of the teachers is we'll have a conversation. And all of a sudden she's like, oh, she just thought she was going to sit there and have a conversation with a parent. And now she knows, she's on notice, but it also is great because it shows her alignment that we're both working towards the same goal, and it allows us then to go down into the details and work on things that are effective with, the perceived outcome that we're both looking for.
Yeah, 100%. That makes me think about communication in the context of leadership. So often we look at, let's say, for example, if we talk about perhaps a team member that's not performing the way that we would like them to, right? And I'm sure that, many people have experienced varying degrees of poor performance within teams. Sometimes it's just, that their activity levels have dropped, or perhaps they're not getting the results that we would like them to get, or it might be so far as to looking at a full-on performance development or a performance improvement plan. Perhaps there's a warning. So at all ends of the scale, when we look at leadership, I think one of the most important things when nurturing people and looking at improving performance is that we need to be able to utilize our language to set a frame in terms of what good looks really looks like. And often I see leaders go into conversations where they're focusing on the lack of performance, but they're not bringing any solutions in terms of, well, this is kind of the outcome that we're looking for. And to be really clear about that, to then work with that person to support how are we going to get from the present situation that we're in to the desired outcome that we're in, and what would be the measure of excellence along the way? What are the milestones, or what are some of the behaviors that we could be doing? And so when we look at our language and how we pace and lead for outcomes, it shows up in all places. But if we're not clear in our own minds around the outcomes that we want to achieve, meaning that we haven't sat down to do the critical thinking work to actually determine what does good look like, what is the language that we need to frame it in so that the other person has clarity for that, then it becomes just about perhaps maybe highlighting all the things that are wrong. And that doesn't create psychological safety in your workplace. And it certainly doesn't encourage an individual to be focused on, all right, how do I adapt my behavior into what good looks like?
That really reminds me of a really interesting hot seat we had a little while back, Shondell, where we had a team leader who has a series of supervisors or direct reports to him, and of different departments of sales. And across that, there was one particular department that was known as the leaky bucket. In other words, it's where it's not working. And this sales leader had been stepped up into the role, and the leader, doing the right thing, was giving some space for him to go there and maximize and get the results using his own style, not micromanaging him on a second by second, day by day basis, but allowing him to sort of go through there, get there. Now, the problem with this is that time is of the essence when it comes to getting a team operating. And what should have been a 3-month period of grace to be able to find your feet and grow your team and build the rapport and grow through that was now at 6 months, and the productivity and the results of this team was dramatically way behind where it needed to be. And the interesting thing that came up through this hot seat was the inability of this main leader, the leader of these other 3 people, for him to be able to articulate and have a difficult conversation of holding that person accountable for their language of how they're communicating with the team, how all the reasons why they couldn't hit their activities, the reasons why they couldn't hit their minimums, the reasons why they couldn't hit their account that they needed to hit was all being lent and left without being challenged, because the leader didn't have either the ability to be able to articulate and get specific, or there was an emotional fear about, if he does hold this a person accountable, will they leave? And also the flip side of that, when we discovered in the hot seat, was the person's probably going to leave anyway if they don't actually get the results that they need to, given that they've stepped into a role of increasing a team's productivity, which then relates back directly to cash in his pocket as far as bonuses. So it was a really interesting scenario where we noticed that the inability to have a conversation, the inability of being able to have and use language led to a very disempowering situation. And the result of that was that through that difficult hot seat, that person became aware, and also the rest of their influence, their leaders at the same level, also became aware of where they may be not having a conversation in the way of being able to communicate and really get clear what is the specific action item, what's the specific measurement I need to be able to get across, and how do I articulate this so that I'm seeing the activity take place, so therefore I know what I've said has landed and then got a result.
You know, what that really reminds me of is when we talk about confidence and empowerment in the context of leadership and in business and in sales, the word confidence is a real interesting one, because often people have a group of behaviors or things that they need to do that they feel completely congruent and completely confident about. And then there might be a handful of things that they look at and they go, I just don't know if I can be that kind of person. Or they'll absolutely abreact to it and say, well, I'm not that kind of leader. And usually it relates to things like holding people accountable to certain activities or certain targets. And so we had this hot seat with a group of leaders where it was really clear, and it became really clear as part of the program that we were undertaking, that the person had some limitations in terms of their confidence. Now, it's an interesting concept, confidence, because when we look at confidence, the origins of the word actually come from Latin, and some of the roots of the word are embedded in the concept of having trust within oneself. Now, interestingly enough, we don't build trust. Trust as a concept, often we'll say, is that trust is built by small agreements being made and kept over time. And confidence is actually built by small actions being completed and repeated over time. So when we looked at this leader that was having this challenge in the hot seat, they didn't necessarily have the confidence to do some of the things that were going to move the needle the most, which was to have conversations and articulate what was important as part of the conversation in terms of the lack of performance, to articulate what needed to happen for that particular leader that they were managing. But in addition to that, it wasn't the situation in the company or the set of circumstances or the results that was causing that hesitation. The hesitation was coming from within. And this is why we say that the first sale that you make is the most important one. This is the sale you make to yourself. If you don't buy into what it is that you need to do or what you believe, then it's really difficult to get other people to buy in as well. And so this leader had a lack of confidence, which was really a lack of trust in themselves, that they could articulate, this is what I need you to produce, and here's how we're going to get it. And if you need my support, then this is what you need to access it. So the inability to use language, but also paired with the lack of confidence of being able to trust in himself that he could have that conversation and not either lose the team member or upset the team or potentially end up in a situation that was worse than what he had perceived was the situation he was in, was stopping him from taking any action. So our inability to use language and articulate our scenarios and our outcomes and what we're hoping to achieve will also impact the actions we take or we do not take.
So one of the interesting things that I find that people are often have a bit of an eye-opener and they go, wow, I'd never thought about that, was being aware and conscious and having a strong intent with your language in saying it the way you want it. Now, if you've ever been a parent, you will know the dangers of saying things you don't want it, the way you don't want it, all right? So being clear and being specific with your communication, saying things the way you want it is very, very clear. And that's making sure that you leave out any negations. All right. And I'll show you what happens when you bring a negation into a conversation. Now, whatever you do, don't think of a blue tree. Now, a lot of people would have thought of a blue tree. And I said, don't think of a blue tree. And in order for you to not think of a blue tree, you have to think about a blue tree. And I had asked this question and done this on trainings for some 16 years. There's only one time one person put their hand up and said, I didn't think of a blue tree. I thought of a sad tree. And I thought, right, okay, there's someone who's really in charge of their communication within their own internal mind. Well done on that. All right. So we got to think about it. All right. So think about the language we use ourselves. Oh, I hope I don't blow that sale. Oh, I really hope I have this conversation. I don't screw up and really upset them. Or what if I go there and say the wrong thing? I don't want to upset the person. I don't want them to leave. All right. All we're doing is we're setting up the language, saying it the way that we don't want it, which is what we're going to be getting. So we're going to start being clear and catching ourselves, saying it the way we want it. All right. Stay on the footpath as opposed to don't run across the road, and don't drive. Make sure you don't drive dangerously or don't speed as opposed to drive safely. Okay. And we're seeing this, and advertising are starting to get clear on this. And we see this a lot in the government advertising now. They're starting to get clear on saying things the way they want it. So being aware of the language that comes out of your mouth when you're endeavoring to get the message across. Are you saying it the way you want it, or are you using negations, negative words, don't, shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't, instead of, or pausing in between the thing you want them to do? Therefore, what happens is you're creating the picture in their head of what they don't want. And as you all know, pictures tell 1,000 words.
I love
I don't know where that comes from. That was brilliant.
That was brilliant. And pictures do tell 1,000 words, and we're making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pictures in our mind. Every second we're making pictures in our mind. And I think that one of the things that a lot of people miss is the fact that the pictures in our mind are ultimately affected by some of the language that we use. Now, you might be thinking about language just when you're talking to other people, but the reality is we're all talking to ourselves second to second to second. And the way we talk to ourselves can actually impact the pictures that we make. So when we talk about empowerment, we talk about the importance of being able to achieve what you really want to achieve. One of the ways that you can fire the itty bitty shitty committee is to say things the way that you want it. And so, for example, in the context of health and fitness, if you're going towards a health and fitness goal, you might say, I'm in the process of becoming fit and healthy. Or if you're in sales and you're wanting to meet your budget, you might say, I'm in the process of creating the relationships that allow me to achieve my budget for this year. If you're in a relationship or you're looking to create a magical relationship with someone, I'm in the process of finding my significant other that I'm going to lead a magical life with. This is about saying things the way that you want it and avoiding any negations, because when we use words that are negations, we actually start to focus on the things that we don't want. And you probably heard it before. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or you can't, then you're right. So how you talk to yourself about how you think you can achieve things will certainly make a difference to whether or not you're in the process of creating them or in the process of convincing yourself that it'll never happen for you. So the thing I'd like you to focus on is, what do I really want? Where is my intention, or where is my outcome? And then how could I say that in a way that's congruent to the thing I want to achieve and the picture that I would have in my head if I got it? And then how can I use language to talk about it in such a way that is positive for an outcome? And when you nail that for yourself, then you'll start to practice on nailing that when you speak to other people as well. And at Life Puzzle, you might know that we say that sales is the number one life skill, and that we actually have 3 important sales that we make. The first one is the sale to yourself. If you don't nail that sale, very hard to convince other people that you are congruent and you believe what it is that you're saying. The second sale is when we share our ideas and we're influential with our language, which is what we're here talking about, to others, so that we can help them to make the pictures in their mind that equals success for them. And then the third sale is our transactional sale, which is how do we build value in a product or service or a concept that people just look at it and go, yes, that makes total sense. I want to actually create that relationship. And so language is a really big part on how we actually create those connections, and how we first start with empowering ourselves, looking to influence and to help other people empower themselves too. And then how do we create win-win-win relationships in the way in which we use language and how we interact with others. In some of those coaching sessions that we've been doing, Alex, what have you seen as being kind of like the 2 or 3 or 4 things that are the most concerning for some of the people we've been dealing with?
I guess, first thing that I've noticed is the lack of confidence that people actually have within their actual workspace itself. I feel like a lot of people are not feeling like they're being heard, or, they're a little afraid to step forward. And once again, it's a lack of confidence. And I guess as a leader, you need to look at the team around you. And if they're not stepping forward and they're not stepping up and they're not coming to you, then you have to actually look at yourself as a leader and go, what's actually going on here and how am I being perceived? And once again, it comes back to communication. How am I communicating? Am I effective in my communication with my team? The other thing as well is understanding an outcome. And I think that's really important that we just spoke about that before, is going into a conversation and understanding what is the outcome that you're looking for. Because a lot of the times we talk to a lot of leaders and people that are, in leadership and there to empower others. But for them, a lot of the time they think about managing teams as opposed to leading teams, and what actually is the outcome that they're looking to achieve. So is this just going to be a conversation that I have with the person opposite me? What's my intent? Use my language with intention, be certain about the person sitting opposite me. How am I perceived? How am I communicating with them? It's using your sensory acuity. It's being able to look outside of yourself. It's being able to see, is this person responding, and are they acknowledging what it is that I'm speaking of? And the other thing too, of course, is congruency. So it's congruency as a leader and being able to communicate with people, but showing them you're confident and showing them that you're confident that they can achieve the outcome. And then it's working backwards and just building the steps that need to take place. Once again, being effective in your communication, having your outcome stated in the positive, forward focused, and of course, you're able to resource people on their journey along the way.
From my perspective, if I could just interject, I think that there's a couple of really key points that you made there. One, that people are not feeling confident. They don't feel like they're being heard. And so there's definitely some distinctions that we need to make if we're leaders, to ask ourselves the question, what can I do differently that my people will feel heard? Is there something in the way in which I am delivering my messaging that if I change that would allow people to feel more comfortable and more confident? And then also, as you know, the three of us talk all the time about above and below the line behavior. And so there's cause and effect. Are people at the effect of their circumstances? Are they potentially victimizing themselves below the line, blaming others, making excuses, being in denial? Or are they above the line, taking ownership for their part that they're playing in that? And so while I think that there's an onus on leaders definitely to look at their style and to look at any biases that they may have in their communication, I also think it's really important for the people who are being led to be clear about, well, what would make me feel confident, and what is the outcome that I'm trying to achieve, or how would I know that I was heard? And I think Alex and Brad, we've both seen in many of our coaching sessions that when we ask those questions of the people who are being led, that are in the teams, that often they don't have clear answers. So even if their leaders could provide those tools for them, they don't know what that's measured by. And that creates a huge problem because it sets our leaders up to fail. What do you guys think about that, Brad?
Yeah, it happens quite a lot where you ask people, are you able to articulate the your definition of good? Are you able to articulate your definition of done? And what time frame? Because often people will delegate and just give the job to someone else to do, and not realizing they haven't actually set up the image in their head of what is their image of done, what is their definition of good. So the person goes off and does that thing, comes back and goes, I've done it. And it's like, oh, that's nothing what I asked for. And all of a sudden there's a conversation where the person walks away feeling a lack of confidence because they weren't able to deliver what they thought was a great job, because there was no communication of what is the definition of good, what's the definition of done. And that gets down to the leader. And all of a sudden then this flows on. The leader goes, wow, I can't lead. I can't seem to get people to do their things. I keep talking about the same thing over and over again. And why can't people just do what I ask? Without going through that process of being a manager and micromanaging people to an nth of their breathing, to be able to then not seriously work out why they can get the outcomes that they want. So it's interesting, isn't it, that a lot of that times that as a leader, our lack of confidence in being clear on what is the outcome that we want is not being able to be articulated in a clear and concise way that we know our message is getting across, and then wonder why we didn't get the result we wanted. We see that happen a fair amount, and having people sort of slow down to speed up in that communication, where typically a leader will just get in there and do the job because they've come from doing that job to now a leader trying to help other people to do it. And their default is to go back there and do it because it's going to take such a long time for me to be able to articulate what needs to happen to do that, and then wonder why 6 months, 8 months, 12 months later, they're still in there rolling up their sleeves doing it, wondering why they are now have all these other activities they've got to do as a leader, plus the grunt work, because they haven't actually taken steps to slow down, to speed up. So slow down their communication to speed up their productivity. I think that's one of the big insights I've seen. as far as those shifts and changes around it, because we know that you're not born a leader. You just don't rock up and land at the leadership level. There's a pathway to get there, and we often default back to doing rather than leading.
Actually, that brings to mind something that happened with a client the other day. I was on a call, and I was looking at the client's sheet that we asked them to prepare ahead of the session. And I said, help me understand a little bit more about this particular question. And it was, is leadership something that people innately have, or can it be taught? And so I think that there's a perception that, and this ultimately relates back to the visible behavior that we see in people. There are some people that through their behaviors or through their language, through the way in which they arrange the framing, the articulation of outcomes, things like that, they give a perception of leadership. And for people who perhaps don't feel as confident with some of those behaviors and those actions, they don't always know whether or not someone else is capable of being able to learn that. And I thought that was super interesting, because those kinds of belief systems and the way that people talk to themselves will impact their ability to go in pursuit of those skills to actually learn to become a leader, because they'll think that, oh, well, I wasn't born like that, so therefore I must not be very good at it, and I can't advance any further in my career.
So, Alex, what's some of the big learnings you've had since coming on board with Lifetime, as far as, the sales process that we're educating people on in communication, and coming from a background as myself did, and obviously Shondell to a degree as well, coming from a background of really teaching this to people, to being able to go through to implementing it with leaders and teaching it. It's a big difference between just teaching information randomly to being able to teach how to implement it. So what's some of the things that you've learned in the communication and sales and leadership that you think has been the big difference as far as just teaching a concept to teaching implementation?
Well, the first thing I've noticed, Brad, is people's awareness. So it's making people aware of the things that they've been unconsciously aware of. So, that's the first thing. The second thing as well is, and it goes a little bit back to what we were talking about before, Shondell, is, one of the things I've noticed is a lot of people have issues in and around their communication style, and it affects things like being able to delegate. And, whether you're in a sales role, or whether you're actually, you're having a conversation with somebody over the phone or face to face, or whether you're in a position of leadership, or even if you're actually an employee in a company, it's understanding how to communicate effectively. It's having the skill set to be able to delegate. I think one of the most important things that we've probably learned and taught is time management, and that's really, key in being effective at being able to delegate your time, being able to delegate other team members. It's bringing awareness to the outcome. A lot of people are just going about their day, and, the thing is, you want to be focused on the outcome, because once you've got a goal and you're focused on your goals, then people, rather than just turning up every day and going through the motions, then they're forward focused. They're focused on an outcome, and there's something bigger, and that causes expansion, of course, within their neurology. And that's where the stretch comes in terms of coaching.
I really love that you highlighted there around time management. And this is something that people might connect time management as being something totally separate, being like a skill that is very logical and sequential, and probably much more left brain than it is right brain. But the reality is that the emotional well-being is affected if someone feels like they don't have enough time. And it's a common complaint that people say, oh, I don't have enough time. I could do all of these things if only I had more time. And what's really interesting, I'm stressed because I don't have time.
And when they get stressed, they know your IQ goes down when you're stressed. You make silly mistakes. So therefore, they got no time, and they complain about not having any time, and then they get stressed about not having any time. They make mistakes. Wonder why their team can bite them in the backside. Sorry, Shondell, you were saying?
Well, but this is true, right? Because the emotion of stress, the label, whatever that is to that person, it might be frustrated, it might be overwhelmed, it might be feeling unresourceful, but people get stressed because they don't have time. Then they get stressed about not having time, as you said. And then on top of that, they make mistakes, and then they haven't got time to fix the mistakes that they made. So that sort of becomes a snowballing effect or a dominoing effect. And I think what's really interesting is that time and not having time is usually a symptom of something else. And a lot of the time, if we chunk upstream and we go a little bit further and it's one of my favorite questions, as you know, to say to somebody, well, what's the problem that you have today? If we look 6 weeks, 12 weeks ago, where was the hints that this was going to be a problem? Because, hindsight is 2020, but time and the lack of time is often a symptom, which then affects confidence. Because if I haven't got time to do things, if I haven't got time to hear myself think, if I haven't got time to actually feel like I've got something under control, and I'm trying to juggle a million different things with different interruptions, then odds are I'm probably going to make a mistake, or I'm going to walk into something feeling like I'm less than prepared, which then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because I haven't done it as well as I would have liked to had I made more time for it. And so I think one of the reasons why we teach methods of effective one of the reasons why we teach methods of effective time management is really about being able to make sure that everybody gets that we've all got the same amount of hours. It's the things we prioritize, and that's going to be the definition of success, because we can do anything and unfortunately we can't do everything. So we have to make prioritization. And sometimes, like you said, Brad, it's about being able to make a small investment of time for the long-term gain. And I think many leaders and people in general, it could be in any context of life, sometimes people struggle to make the investment up front. It might take a little bit longer at the very front to be able to invest in that outcome for a long-term gain, but we struggle to see that. So we keep the perpetual pattern of overwhelm and disorganization. And I think that affects what people believe they can do, which ultimately affects their confidence.
Yeah. And I think it comes back down to in working the leadership space, teaching people how to think and teaching people how to communicate for many, many years, moving that into the leadership space and being able to work with people that, as a leader, that I know I can influence them to be a lot more productive and therefore a lot more effective with their communications, which is a larger group of people. The one-to-many approach is rather effective there. It's come really down to whenever I'm looking at a leadership team, when I'm looking at taking on a new leader, I'm looking at, first of all, are they able to manage their time, right? Can they communicate with their team, all right? And do they have the ability to transfer knowledge, okay? So I need to have time to communicate. I need to be able to communicate effectively, transfer knowledge. If I can't transfer knowledge, I don't have the time, because I don't create the time, and we're in this vicious circle. So looking at how we create the time to have the communication, and then knowing how to communicate the transfer of knowledge is the difference between someone who's going to be a manager and be stagnant in that management role to someone who's going to be a leader, who's going to be able to replace their position in that role for them to move up, and therefore also be able to create a legacy of a process of being able to train the next level of leaders coming through. Now, left of field here, but my wife's a school teacher. I'm not sure how much of the news you watched lately, but right now the education system in itself is in a crisis with school refusal, learning outcomes and activities and things like that. And the fact of the matter is that the pool of resources of people you're going to have available in your business is going to be of effective skills of actually gets it and wants it as opposed to can do it, right, is going to be significantly reduced over the coming years. There's already been a war on talent, and it's already very difficult to find great team members. It's only going to get harder. So the sooner you can articulate and understand the difference between management and leadership that is empowering to grow that next generation up, the more you're going to bulletproof and recession-proof your business, because I can tell you there's only so much that AI is going to do. We're still going to need human beings, and we need to be able to have the smart human beings who are able to allocate and manage their time, communicate, and transfer knowledge.
Yes, 100%. And I think, the ability to utilize technology is something that's super important. I see people being left behind by not embracing technology. And I think something that we need to remember is that it still requires great critical thinking to be able to use some of the tools and the technologies that are available. And what's going to become more and more of an untapped resource is human beings that understand human connection in communication, and the ability to actually read and utilize the communication that's in front of you. There are so many things that our technologies and our resources can do, At the moment, though, something that is highly in demand is obviously human beings who are able to connect with other human beings and to create great outcomes together or with a group. So I think you're 100% right, Brad, that the labour shortage that we're seeing today and the war on talent and all of the things that we've been experiencing, we're probably experiencing it in the best possible scenario at the moment. It's probably only going backwards. And so I think that that's an important factor for people to think about. How am I showcasing my value in terms of not only my experience and my technical skills, but also how am I bringing my soft skills and my ability to think critically and the ability to connect with other human beings and help them produce outcomes is going to be certainly where the higher salaries are going to be paid and the careers are going to be developed. And so if you're not thinking about that at this point in time, then now's a good time to be thinking about. And I say it all the time, we do a lot of work in different industries where technical skills are highly valued. We do a lot of sales training programs. And so often we're working with people who are technically brilliant, but perhaps they don't communicate at the value of what their technical brilliance is to people who are speaking layman terms by contrast to their technical. Yeah, these are words again, right? Pacing and leading thoughts processes. This is where language becomes important, because if I'm speaking to someone who's got amazing technical ability in a field that I don't understand the jargon, and then they bring me jargon, then that makes me leave in a way that I feel like I didn't really understand. So how does that technically brilliant person adapt their communication for someone like me who doesn't understand the jargon, and that I can be in the world of the value that they provide? And there are so many people that don't know how to do this as well as they could. And my point in addressing that is the fact that when we transfer knowledge, when we're leading people, when we're actually sharing all of this information, we're using mostly soft skills. We're using human skills. We're using our ability, like Alex said, sensory acuity, which is the ability to observe small changes in people moment to moment and know that those changes have meaning, to actually be able to calibrate, as in like to see the changes between now and 3 seconds ago, is the ability to have those soft skills. And it's not enough anymore in this world, in the way that things are advancing. It's not enough to just be technically brilliant. Organizations and their teams are demanding so much more from us as individuals, and a big part of what they're demanding is the ability to be seen, heard, and understood. And that's all soft skills and communication, and of course, empowerment by utilizing our language.
Yeah, absolutely. And the communication being verbal, the fact now we've got teenagers sitting under bus stop communicating to each other through Snapchat because they can't actually communicate face to face or worried about what they're saying is a good indication of where communicating and being able to articulate words that get the point across, your point across, your emotional well-being, I think is the difference, going to make the difference for leaders in the future.
And if I could say one more thing on that, I think that you make a really good point around, some of the teenagers and the younger people, the younger generations that are coming through. We have to recognize, as people who grew up in different generational times, that the way in which people communicate and their comfort with certain things might be different. And some of our soft skills have less opportunity to be practiced because of technology. And Brad, you and I have certainly seen that there have been some experiences. We have 4 generations of people working in a workplace at this given time. And that's because our baby boomers are working longer than they ever have before. We've got our Generation X's, our Y's, our millennials coming through, and each different group has a different set of values and they experienced a different world from each other. And it's not that any of those worlds are bad, they're just different. And sometimes there's a lack of clarity and understanding and appreciation for the differences in those things. And so when we look at perhaps maybe being in the XY generation, the importance of practicing a verbal conversation, giving live feedback rather than sending an email to someone. And this came up in a session we were doing the other day where it's like, have you given live feedback? No, I've just communicated via email or, in response to that report. Well, the capability of someone who's perhaps in the upcoming generations to have practice experiences where they've got confidence to give live feedback is almost non-existent now, because most people are communicating one way with their auditory digital, typing messages to people through their phones, through their emails, through their messenger, etc. And so I think that the point that we're making here around human communication and practicing those skills is something that's super important. Remember, we've said that confidence is built by small actions being completed and repeated over time. And some of the sessions that you and I have gone into, Brad, we've seen that people have just never had the cause to actually practice a conversation like that out loud.
Yep. How do I have a difficult conversation? Well, you need to say, hey, let's have a difficult conversation. What a concept.
Amazing. And as the words come out of the mouth, the fingers don't move at all.
Yeah, just voice to text. That's the other thing,
yes.
isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.